Hey people, get ready to crush everyday TOEFL iBT tests for all modules and make your dreams come true. I'm your motivator and I'll be guiding you through the test prep videos. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe or you'll be missing out on some serious preparation.
Should university students be required to take courses outside their major? Explain. Begin speaking now.
I think university students should take courses outside their major. It is very important for them. When students study different subjects, they can learn many things. For example, if a student studies science, they can also learn about history or art. This is good because they will know more things. Also, students can make more friends from different classes. This is helpful for their future job. My friend studies only engineering and he doesn't know about other topics. So I think all students must take different courses. It will help them a lot in their life and work.
In my opinion, university students should be required to take courses outside their major. There are two main reasons for this. First, taking diverse courses helps students develop a broader knowledge base. For instance, a business student who takes a psychology class will better understand consumer behavior, which is directly useful in their career. Second, exposure to different subjects encourages critical thinking. When students encounter new ideas from various fields, they learn to approach problems in more flexible ways. Although some students may feel these courses waste their time, I believe the benefits outweigh this concern. Overall, a well-rounded education prepares students more effectively for the challenges of modern professional life.
I firmly believe that universities should mandate coursework beyond students' primary fields of study, and I would support this policy for two compelling reasons. First, interdisciplinary exposure cultivates intellectual versatility, a quality increasingly valued in today's rapidly evolving job market. A computer science student who engages with an ethics course, for example, is far better equipped to navigate the complex moral dimensions of technology development. Second, such requirements foster unexpected connections between disciplines. Historically, many transformative breakthroughs, from behavioral economics to biomechanics, emerged precisely at the intersection of seemingly unrelated fields. While students may initially resist spending time away from their specialization, the cognitive flexibility and breadth of perspective they gain ultimately make them far more innovative and adaptable professionals.
Effective Fall 2026, Greenfield University will implement a mandatory student activity fee of $75 per semester for all enrolled students. This fee will fund extracurricular programs, including student clubs, campus events, recreational facilities, and mental health workshops. University administrators note that current funding for student organizations has been insufficient, resulting in the cancellation of several popular programs last year. Officials believe a centralized fee structure will ensure consistent, equitable access to activities for all students. To maintain student input, a newly formed Student Activity Fee Committee, composed of elected student representatives, will oversee fund allocation and publish annual spending reports for the campus community. Two students, Maya and Daniel, discuss the announcement outside the campus library. Maya expresses a strong opinion about the new policy. Maya strongly opposes the new student activity fee. She argues first that the fee is fundamentally unfair to commuter and part-time students who rarely use campus facilities or attend events, yet would be charged the same amount as highly involved residential students. Second, she contends that students already face significant financial pressure from tuition and living costs, and believes the university should instead pursue alternative funding sources, such as corporate sponsorships or reallocating administrative budgets, rather than imposing additional mandatory charges on the student body. The student expresses an opinion about the university's announcement. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion. Begin speaking now.
The student doesn't like the new fee. She says it is not fair because some students don't use the activities. For example, students who go home after class and don't stay on campus. They have to pay but they don't use anything. Also, she says that the fee is too much money and students already pay a lot for school. She thinks the university should find other ways to get money instead of asking students to pay. So she thinks students should not be required to pay this new fee every semester.
The student expresses a negative opinion about the university's new mandatory student activity fee. She provides two main reasons. First, she argues the fee is unfair to students who do not regularly participate in campus activities, particularly commuter students who leave campus right after class. Since these students rarely attend events or use the facilities mentioned in the announcement, requiring them to pay the same $75 as more involved students seems unjust. Second, she points out that many students are already under significant financial pressure from tuition and housing costs. She believes the university should explore alternative funding strategies, like corporate sponsorships or budget reallocation, rather than placing additional financial burdens on students.
The student takes a clear stance against the university's newly announced student activity fee, supporting her opposition with two well-developed arguments. To begin with, she contends that a uniform mandatory fee is fundamentally inequitable because it disregards the vastly different levels of campus engagement among students. She specifically highlights commuter and part-time students who, unlike the residential students the administration appears to have in mind when drafting the announcement, have limited time to attend events or access recreational facilities yet would be charged equally. Her second argument centers on financial accessibility. Given the already substantial costs of tuition, housing, and course materials, an additional $75 per semester represents a meaningful burden, particularly for lower-income students. She therefore proposes that the university pursue external revenue streams, such as alumni donations or business partnerships, as a more equitable alternative to mandatory student fees.
Language acquisition refers to the process by which humans develop the capacity to perceive, produce, and use words to understand and communicate. Unlike language learning, which involves conscious study, acquisition occurs naturally and subconsciously through exposure to meaningful input. Linguists distinguish between first language acquisition, in which children internalize their native tongue without formal instruction, and second language acquisition, in which individuals adopt an additional language later in life. Foundational theories suggest that humans possess an innate biological predisposition for language, often called the language acquisition device, while others emphasize the role of social interaction and environmental input in shaping linguistic competence. A linguistics professor elaborates on the concept of language acquisition by describing a longitudinal study of a bilingual child named Maya, who was raised in a household where Spanish was spoken by her mother and English by her father. The professor explains that Maya simultaneously acquired both Spanish and English before age 3 without explicit instruction, demonstrating that children can internalize more than one linguistic system through natural exposure alone. She notes that Maya initially mixed the two languages, a phenomenon called code switching, but gradually separated them as she learned which language to use with each parent. The professor uses this example to illustrate how social context and caregiver interactions serve as the primary engine of first language acquisition. Using the example from the lecture, explain the concept of language acquisition as described in the reading. Begin speaking now.
The reading says language acquisition is how people learn language naturally without studying. The professor talks about a child named Maya who learned Spanish and English because her parents spoke different languages. She mixed them at first but then learned to keep them separate. This shows that children can get language from their environment.
According to the reading, language acquisition is the natural, subconscious process through which people develop the ability to understand and use language, as opposed to conscious language learning. The professor illustrates this with a child named Maya, who grew up in a bilingual household where her mother spoke Spanish and her father spoke English. Without any formal instruction, Maya acquired both languages simultaneously before age 3, which supports the idea that social interaction and meaningful exposure drive acquisition. She also mixed the two languages early on, a behavior called code switching, but eventually separated them based on social context.
The reading defines language acquisition as the natural, subconscious internalization of language through meaningful exposure, distinguishing it from deliberate language learning and noting that both innate biological factors and social interaction play significant roles. The professor's example of Maya powerfully reinforces this. Maya was raised in a bilingual home, her mother speaking Spanish, her father English, and she acquired both languages simultaneously by age 3, entirely without formal instruction. This directly exemplifies the reading's claim that environmental input and caregiver interaction are central to acquisition. The professor also highlights that Maya initially code-switched between the two languages, blending them in single utterances, but progressively separated them as she internalized the social contexts associated with each. This developmental trajectory demonstrates that acquisition is not instantaneous but an adaptive, context-driven process, precisely as the reading's framework predicts.
An ecology professor delivers a lecture on food web dynamics, explaining how energy and matter flow through interconnected feeding relationships in an ecosystem, using a coastal marine ecosystem as the central example. The professor first explains trophic cascades, describing how the removal of apex predators, specifically killer whales hunting sea otters in the Pacific, triggered an explosive growth of sea urchins, which in turn decimated kelp forests and destabilized the entire ecosystem. She then introduces the concept of trophic efficiency, noting that only about 10% of energy stored at one trophic level is transferred to the next, which explains why food webs support far fewer apex predators than primary producers and why the collapse of any single level can send disproportionate shockwaves throughout the web. Together, these two mechanisms illustrate that food web stability depends on both the presence of key species and the efficient flow of energy across levels. Using points and examples from the lecture, explain food web dynamics. Begin speaking now.
The professor talks about food webs and how animals eat each other. She gives an example of killer whales and sea otters. When killer whales ate the sea otters, the sea urchins grew a lot and destroyed the kelp. She also says that energy goes from one animal to another but most of it is lost. so food webs can break down if one animal disappears.
The professor explains food web dynamics using two main ideas. First, she discusses trophic cascades, which occur when the removal of a top predator causes changes throughout the entire food web. In her example, killer whales hunted sea otters, reducing their population and allowing sea urchins to multiply rapidly, which then destroyed kelp forests. This shows how the loss of one species can destabilize a whole ecosystem. Second, she explains trophic efficiency, noting that only about 10% of energy passes from one trophic level to the next. This is why there are many more producers than apex predators in any food web, and why disrupting any level has significant consequences.
The professor uses two interconnected mechanisms to explain food web dynamics. The first is trophic cascades, which she illustrates with a striking example from the Pacific coast. When killer whales began preying heavily on sea otters, otter populations declined sharply, removing a key predator of sea urchins. The unchecked sea urchin population then overconsumed kelp forests, collapsing a habitat that supports a vast array of marine species. This cascade demonstrates that apex predators act as keystone regulators, and their removal can trigger destabilizing effects that ripple downward through every trophic level. The second concept is trophic efficiency, the principle that only roughly 10% of the energy stored at one level is successfully transferred to the next. The professor explains that this steep energy loss fundamentally constrains food web architecture. It is why primary producers vastly outnumber herbivores, which in turn far outnumber apex predators. Critically, she connects both concepts by arguing that food web stability is a product of both the structural presence of key species and the energetic efficiency linking all levels. Compromise either, and the entire system becomes vulnerable to collapse.
Hey people, how was your test? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or you'll be missing out on some serious fun. See you tomorrow!